So last Tuesday, we started our Bible study, one in person and one on Zoom. By the way, it's a drop-in group, so feel free to come whenever you want. Anyways, we had a good turnout and wonderful conversation. And I was surprised by the direction of the conversation. Every lesson from the lectionary is on the table for discussion. And side note, for those of you who don't know, the lectionary is a 3-year schedule of readings from the Bible, one from the Hebrew Bible, as well as a psalm, one from the Christian Testament that isn't the gospel, and a gospel reading. Excuse me. Through these 3 years, we hear a lot, though not all, of the Bible. And when I say lessons, I mean the passages of Scripture, like you just heard from Genesis and such. Anyhow, on Tuesday, I was surprised. I guess I expected everyone to want to talk about Nicodemus and the gospel, but they didn't. There was a little Nicodemus talk, but not much. The evening Zoom group talked more about the Psalm and Genesis. And the morning in-person group, well, it was about noon, actually, it wasn't morning. The in-person group also spun out from Genesis. The Lord said to Abram, "I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." Of course, both groups got a little hung up on God cursing people. Because we don't want to think of our God of love as cursing people. We want to stick to the blessing part. See, that's what Jack wants. But if it's not God cursing us, then honestly, it's kind of our religion. The institution of Christianity through history has been a bit of a curse. That's where some of the conversation during Bible study went. This curse took root at the very beginning, and it wasn't malicious. Just some Jews reinterpreting their faith according to their experience. And then, in a lovely and honestly revolutionary turn, those Jews who believed that Jesus was the Christ, the Anointed One, invited Gentiles into that experience. Together, they created intentional communities in which resources were shared and the vulnerable were tended to. We hear about all of this in the Acts of the Apostles and in many of Paul's letters. The way they lived was so compelling that the faith grew fairly quickly throughout the Middle East and into Greece. So far, so good. But then, humans being humans, this group of Jesus-believing people eventually got distracted from their purpose of loving Jesus and loving their neighbor. First, by fighting about whose beliefs about Jesus were right, which meant to them, to many of them at least, that their Jewish forebears needed to be wrong. A stance that has led to 2 millennia of Jewish persecution by Christians. Within its first few centuries, Christianity got involved in politics. Bishops started courting rulers, and eventually they got into the ear of none other than Constantine, the emperor of the Roman Empire. Now, most of you have heard me say, where would we be without Constantine? Because it was Constantine who made it permissible for Christians to practice their faith throughout the Roman Empire. after decades of Christianity being suppressed and sometimes persecuted. And then he became an active supporter of the faith. Christianity got tied up with state power. But it is exactly because Christianity was formally adopted by the Roman Empire that it was able to spread and spread and spread. It might be the main reason we're here today. Way back in the 4th century. But being tied to state power means needing to have the one true and correct faith, so that it creates the unity, we'll say if we're being generous, or the conformity, if we're being a little more realistic, needed to have a state faith. A faith that maintains state power must be pretty black and white, pretty legalistic to function. I'll compress the rest of our faith's somewhat cursed history. Correct belief became the name of the game from there on out. The Crusades were all about eliminating those with the wrong faith from the Holy Land. 2 million people died. Wars were fought in Europe after the Reformation. Did the Roman Catholics practice the one true faith, or were they the heretics, as the Protestants believed? The Troubles in Ireland, an extension of those wars, ended in 1998. Of course, none of those conflicts were just about beliefs. They're always about maintaining worldly power. And now our fellow Christians professing the correct belief are banning books. They're restricting access to health care for transgender folks and women. They're trying their best to erase Black and Indigenous history. Today we call that political assertion of correct belief Christian nationalism. Those Christians are our siblings, let's be clear, whether we like it or not. And we are our siblings' keeper. But here we are. I imagine that litany of violence in our history makes you squirm just as much as God promising to curse people who curse Abram. But we don't need God to curse us. We are perfectly capable of carrying out our own curses against one another. Our history has been a long wilderness of curses. But still, here we are. Christians in a Christian church, practicing our Christian faith on Sunday, despite the violence, despite the power grabbing. Why? Well, I think it's because of this part of the Genesis scripture. I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. A great nation did come of Abram, who eventually became Abraham. And it's a rich and complicated nation, a nation of Jews, Muslims, and Christians. Do you know who was great throughout this long, cursed history? The people living their faith simply and authentically and lovingly every single day throughout all those centuries. Just going to the synagogue or mosque or church to be with their community, praying every day, tending to their neighbors. Those who every single day acted in ways that were a blessing to the world. as God blessed them to be. That is also our history. That is also our lineage. And isn't that our hope now? That by living our faith daily in the simplest ways, which is not to say the easiest ways, is how we create the blessing for those to come. How we continue this great nation that was begun with Abram. It's not about being right or correct. It's not about having worldly power. Those things are distractions from our faith. I just listed the destruction that being pulled along by our distractions can inflict on people, on those who are marginalized and oppressed, on the planet itself. And if I'm being really honest, I'm sick of people thinking that our faith is about bringing guns to libraries to protect children from drag queens who want to read stories to those children. I'm sick of people thinking that our faith is about hating gay and lesbian and trans and gender nonconforming folks. I'm sick of people thinking that our faith is about who's in and who's out. I'm sick of people thinking that our faith is about who's deserving of love and care and thriving and who's not. This is why our Lenten practice is to work with our distractions. It's not a trivial practice. Because like those earliest Jesus followers, sometimes it's hard to recognize when something in our lives is turning into a distraction that turns us away from living the love Jesus taught us. So it's not just an important practice, it's a critical practice. It's an urgent practice. And it's not just an individual practice. The way you shape yourself, the way you live your faith in Jesus Christ each day, shapes what our world looks like. So how is your practice? How is your faith? How is your life shaping the world?